The median retirement savings for a working American is $955. Not $955,000, $955. Less than your rent, less than your car payment, less than 1 month of groceries. That's the median, meaning half of working Americans have less than that. At the same time, a study released 2 days ago found that Americans now believe they need $1.46 million to retire comfortably. That's up 15% from last year alone. So here's the math. You need $1.46 million. You have $955. And the gap between those two numbers is your entire future. But that's not even the part that should scare you. The part that should scare you is what happens when you realize you're not going to close that gap and what your brain does next. Most people hear the word retirement and picture an ending. You work for 40 years, you stop, and you live off what you saved. That's the story we were told. But for the majority of Americans, that story is fiction. 45% of Americans will face retirement funding shortfalls if they retire at 65. Not a small shortfall, a catastrophic one. The kind where you outlive your money by a decade or more. And it's not because they were irresponsible. It's because the system was designed for a version of life that no longer exists. When the retirement age was set at 65, the average life expectancy was 63. You were expected to die before you ever collected. That was the math. You weren't supposed to make it. Now, you're expected to live to 80 or beyond. That's 15 to 20 years of living with no paycheck. And the system that was supposed to fund those years, it's collapsing under the weight of a promise it was never designed to keep. But there's a number that makes this personal, and I need you to hear it. 43% of current retirees say they would rather die than run out of money. Read that again. They didn't say they'd rather downsize. They didn't say they'd get a part-time job. They said they would rather die. That's not a financial statistic. That's a psychological crisis hiding inside a spreadsheet. And it tells you something critical about what retirement anxiety actually does to a person. It doesn't motivate you. That's the lie. You'd think knowing these numbers would light a fire. It doesn't. Research consistently shows that when the gap between where you are and where you need to be feels too large, your brain doesn't respond with action. It responds with avoidance. Psychologists call this the ostrich effect. When the numbers are terrifying, you stop looking at them. You skip the 401k statement. You don't open the retirement calculator. You tell yourself you'll figure it out later, and later becomes a decade. 51% of Americans have either stopped or reduced their retirement savings in the last 6 months, not because they don't care, because looking at the gap hurts too much to face. This is the trap. The anxiety that should make you save is the exact same anxiety that makes you stop. But wait, because the math gets crueler. Here's what nobody tells you about retirement savings. They don't work the way you think. If you start saving $500 a month at age 25, by 65, you'll have roughly $1.4 million at average market returns, right around that $1.46 million target. Sounds doable. $500 a month, 40 years, you get there. But what if you start at 35 instead? Same $500 a month, same returns. You end up with about $600,000, less than half. Wait 10 more years, start at 45, you end up with around $220,000. Same monthly amount, same effort, same sacrifice. But the person who started 20 years later ends up with $1.2 million less. That's not a gap you can close with discipline. That's a gap created by time, and only time can fill it. The average American starts saving for retirement at age 31, which means the average American has already lost 6 years of the most powerful compounding window they'll ever have. Not because they were reckless, because nobody told them that 25 to 31 was the most expensive period of their entire financial life. Every year you delay in your 20s costs you roughly $100,000 at retirement. Not because you spent $100,000, because you didn't plant $100,000. And here's where the cruelty really kicks in. Because here's who's actually saving. Workers earning more than $150,000 contribute nearly 13 times more towards retirement than workers earning under $50,000. 13 times. The people who need retirement savings the most are the people who can afford it the least. And that's not a moral failure, it's structural. If 54% of your income goes to housing, food, and transportation, and it does for most Americans, then the money for retirement doesn't exist. You can't save what you've already spent on surviving. The retirement system assumes you have leftover money. Millions of Americans don't have leftover money. They have leftover anxiety. So what do? 41% of Americans say they plan to work during retirement. That's the new plan. Don't retire, just work until you physically can't anymore. But here's the problem with that plan. It assumes your body will cooperate. It assumes your industry will still want you. It assumes you won't get laid off at 58 and discover that nobody hires 58-year-olds for the job you've done your whole life. Planning to work forever isn't a retirement plan. It's a hope. And hope is not a financial strategy.
So what do you actually do with this information? Because here's the thing I refuse to do with this video. I refuse to just scare you and leave. That's what most content does. It shows you the fire and walks away. That's not what wealth theory is for. The math is cruel, but the math also works in reverse. If compound interest is the most destructive force when it's working against you, it's the most powerful force when it's working for you. And it doesn't require a lot of money to start. It requires a little money and a lot of time. If you're in your 20s and you start putting away even $50 a month, not $500, $50, into an index fund, by 65 you'll have roughly $150,000. That's not retirement, but it's the difference between panic and a foundation. If you're in your 30s, the window is still wide open. $500 a month starting at 30 still gets you past $1 million, but the window is closing faster than you think. If you're in your 40s or 50s, the game changes. You need to contribute more aggressively, explore catch-up contributions, and have a real conversation with yourself about what retirement actually looks like for you. Not the fantasy version, the real one. But regardless of your age, the single most important thing you can do is stop avoiding the number. Open the statement, run the calculator, look at the gap. Because the ostrich effect, the avoidance, is costing you more than any market crash ever will. The gap doesn't shrink when you stop looking at it. It grows. Let me leave you with this. 29% of current retirees have zero saved, nothing. And 64% of retirees say the United States is in a retirement crisis. But here's what keeps me up at night. Only 41% believe retirement will even be possible for the typical American 25 years from now. That's not pessimism, that's pattern recognition. They've seen the math. They've lived the math. The system that promised you a finish line is breaking, and the only person who's going to build you a new one is you. The most dangerous lie in personal finance isn't you need to spend less, it's you still have time. You do, but less than you think, and every day you don't start is the most expensive day of your life. If this is the first wealth theory video you've seen, we break down one hidden financial mechanism every week, the psychology that's quietly draining you. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.